Well, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Appraiser Qualifications Board online briefing. My name is John Brenan. I'm the Director of Appraisal Issues with the Appraisal Foundation, and with me here today is Mark Lewis, Chairman of the AQB.
Howdy, y'all.
True Texas greeting for you. So what we want to do today, as many of you know, that at its public meeting on February 1st, the AQB adopted changes to the real property appraiser qualification criteria that went into effect on May 1st, just a little over a month ago. Today, we're going to discuss those changes briefly and also provide some rationale for why they were done and some information related to the implementation of those changes by the states. As we go through this briefing, if anyone has a question that they'd like to ask related to qualifications, please do so by utilizing the chat function that you see in the Zoom software you're currently using to view this live stream. We will attempt at the conclusion of the presentation to answer as many questions as time allows. If for some reason we don't get to all the questions, we will follow up with you afterwards to try to answer your question. So just as a real quick background, Title 11 is the federal law, Title 11 of FIREA, which gives the Appraiser Qualifications Board the authority to set minimum qualifications for appraisers. That includes trainee appraisers, licensed residential, and certified general. The AQB also has the authority to establish qualifications for supervisory appraisers. The minimum qualifications consist of three components: education, both qualifying education and continuing education, experience, and examination requirements. With that, Mark, can you share with us any information regarding what states have implemented pertaining to the AQB changes?
Well, sure. The first thing to understand is that the states have the opportunity or the discretion to adopt some, none, or all of the minimum criteria that we have today that went into effect May the 1st. We have heard from some states who are going to adopt all of it, which is perfectly good and what we would hope to have. But some states have opted to only adopt portions of that criteria. So it's going to be really critical for appraisers coming into the profession as trainees to check with your state, make sure what their rules are and what they have adopted, what they have not adopted. So we have to understand some of the criteria that we passed effective May the 1st is actually lowering especially the experience component of that. And so the states do have the option to not adopt that portion or to go ahead and adopt what's in the criteria.
So yeah, so for clarification, exactly what Mark said, states are required at a minimum to comply with the AQB criteria, but because that new AQB criteria as of May 1st, particularly in the experience angle, is less than what exists prior to May 1st, the states may not choose to adopt that particular component of the requirements. You mentioned that the experience requirements are somewhat less. Some are concerned that these new requirements will equate to less qualified appraisers. How has the AQB addressed this concern?
Well, the AQB wants to emphasize that our charge under Title 11 is to establish minimum qualifications. And qualifications, that's much different than competency. We are dealing with qualifications here. And we firmly believe that the appraiser who is credentialed underneath the May 1st, 2018 criteria, which is the new criteria, is equally qualified to an appraiser who was credentialed under the previous 2015 criteria. That is our position. That's what we are encouraging the jurisdictions to recognize. On the topic of competency versus qualifications, qualifications are what the AQB is concerned with, and what we're charged with is establishing minimum qualifications. Competency is more of a USPAP issue that is gained over time. We are concerned with an appraiser who is entering the profession, who meets minimum qualifications, but competency is acquired over time.
Great. And as you mentioned, the criteria has changed many times over the years. And for those of us who got our credentials way back in the early 1990s, just because the criteria went up many times after that doesn't mean that we're less qualified. So that same line of thinking for the 2018 criteria.
That is correct. It is somewhat of a uncharted territory that we have with the new criteria, because standards our qualifications have tended to just go up. This is the first time that qualifications have come down and been readjusted in a downward fashion. And so we are monitoring that. We're monitoring the jurisdictions and how they implement the new qualifications.
And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those changes when we talk about less. So let's get into some of the specific changes and talk about that. And again, I just want to remind everyone, if you do have a question, type it in the chat box and send it along, and we will attempt to answer it. Regarding some of the changes, let's talk about college level education. Mark, what changes were made to the college level education for someone seeking a licensed residential credential?
Well, under the 2015 criteria, if you recall, for the licensed residential classification, you had to have 30 semester hours of college level education. Those 30 semester hours could be in any topic, and it was just acquiring hours. AQB looked at that, and we took another view of that requirement and decided that for the licensed residential classification, we should remove the college requirement from that completely.
Great. So that requirement has been removed. What about the college level education for someone seeking a certified residential credential? We understand there's many changes that took place there.
We took a hard look at the certified residential classification. First of all, under the 2015 criteria, it's a 4-year college degree that is required for the certified residential, and we don't want to lessen the importance of having a college degree. So it is still in the criteria in May 1st, 2018 criteria that a college degree is required. However, we have created other paths to the certified residential from a college education standpoint. First of all, a 4-year traditional college degree will qualify. Also, you can have an associate's degree in what we are, for the lack of a better term, calling it a specialized field or a focused field of education, which is outlined in the criteria on those topic levels. So we're talking about finance, real estate, accounting, those types of degrees that are associate's degrees. Then you can also have 30 semester hours that are in completely dedicated topics that are outlined in the criteria. If you collect those 30 hours in those topic areas, then you can qualify that way. The fourth option is an option that I don't think a lot of people are going to do because it's extremely difficult, and that is the college level examination program, which they call CLEP. You can take the CLEP exams and you can qualify through either all CLEP, or you can qualify through a combination of the 30 semester hour or traditional college and CLEP. You can do both. So that's a very difficult level to go through, but it's there if you feel like you can pass those CLEP exams. The sixth kind of alternative to a traditional college degree recognizes that those folks who have held a licensed residential credential for a period of 5 years, those folks have proven themselves as capable and qualified. And so if you can document that you've got 5 years as a licensed residential appraiser with no disciplinary actions which would prevent you from practicing, then you can qualify for the educational requirement through that method. You still got to have your QE, you still got to have your experience. So those haven't changed, but it's simply just the college.
So a couple of things. We want to, again, highlight that, as Mark just talked about, these changes for the certified residential credential are strictly college-level education changes. There have been no changes to the qualifying education requirements or the specialized appraiser education that is currently 200 hours for the certified residential. You still need to do 200 hours. And that licensed residential pathway to certified residential that Mark spoke about, as Mark said, you got to have at least 5 years, and you have to have no history of any type of disciplinary sanctions that affected your legal eligibility to practice within the 5 years immediately preceding. When we talk about what that 5 years experience is, at the first part of that, it means, some people say, well, my license was inactive, or I held a licensed residential credential, but it expired. What the 5 years means is that you held a licensed residential credential for 5 years where you were legally eligible to perform appraisals in federally related transactions. So that means the license would have had to been active. It would have had to been in good standing to be able to perform those types of appraisals. That's what qualifies for the 5 years. A lot of this information that we just talked about, there's a lot of people that have had questions about what their whether their particular associate's degree would qualify, whether some of the 30 hours would, whether they would qualify. We do have a new updated real property appraiser qualification criteria handbook effective May 1st. And if you want to download that free of charge, go to our website at appraisalfoundation.org, and you can see all of these options spelled out in detail. Again, we're going to talk also about some guidance that the AQB has issued related to these options just in a little bit here. In addition to the college level education requirements for licensed residential and certified residential, as Mark indicated, there's also been changes to the experience requirements. What did the board decide to do with experience, Mark?
Well, we've taken a hard look at experience. For the licensed residential classification, the new experience requirement there has a 1,000 hours of experience is required for the LR, and you can acquire that 1,000 hours in no less than 6 months, or no fewer than 6 months. To become a certified residential appraiser, you're going to need 1,500 hours acquired in no less than 12 months. For the certified general classification, we did not change the hours. It's still 3,000 hours that's required for certified general. However, we did reduce the minimum time frame those hours can be acquired in from 2 years down to 18 months, or 30 months down to 18 months. So we did change the minimum time frames for all classifications. We lowered the LR and CR hours, kept the CG hours the same.
Thank you. And we're going to talk in just a second here about why the AQB decided to do that. One of the things that we've received some inquiries about is somebody who wants to take that licensed residential to certified residential path where they wouldn't have to satisfy the college level education requirements if they were in good standing for 5 years and had that experience. The remaining requirements will apply to the licensed residential going to the certified residential, as Mark suggested. So, for example, there's a difference in qualifying education between LR and CR of 50 hours. So that individual would have to document successful completion of at least 50 additional hours in their qualifying education. They also have to document any differences in experience. And this gets a little tricky because if your state has adopted the new experience requirements for May 1st, the experience requirements, as Mark just stated, for the certified residential are 1,500 hours in no fewer than 12 months. For existing licensed residential folks, they would have had to document 2,000 hours in no less than 12 months. So if the state does adopt this lower experience requirement, theoretically, those licensed residential people have the experience component that's necessary, if that's the case in your state. So in addition to the 50 additional hours of qualifying ed, the licensed residential appraiser would also have to successfully complete the certified residential examination. And the examinations are a very significant part of what the AQB is doing. And I think we'll get into that more here now. So we talked about the fact that the experience requirements the hours were lowered for LR and CR. The timeframes were lowered for all three of the classifications. Why did the AQB do this, Mark?
Well, it's been a long time since we've looked at the experience leg of the criteria. You remember, AQB is experience, qualifying education, and examination. Those are the three legs that AQB stands on. We've adjusted the qualifying education over the years, and we have been working with the examination part, but we haven't touched that experience leg in a very, very long time. And so because we have done a better job, I think, over the years with qualifying education through our CAP program, our course approval program, we're getting more consistency in qualifying education across the providers, and just getting better consistency in quality of our education. So that's been beefed up. Our examination has been out for many years now, and it has matured to the point that we have a very good, solid exam across all classifications. So we've got those two pieces to the puzzle now that have been shored up. They've been had some time to mature over the years, and it was time to take a look at this experience to make sure they're balanced. And we haven't rebalanced those legs in a very long time. So we just thought it was a very good time to do that. The examination part of that leg, that exam is a very robust exam. It is not one that you just walk into and you can pass. You have to have your QE, you have to have your experience. Otherwise, you're probably not going to be successful in that exam. So it is serving as a gatekeeper. And it was time to go back and adjust those minimum experience requirements. Additionally, we have that's matured a little bit is our supervisor training. So both trainees and supervisors have to go through mandatory training. That's part of the criteria now. So we have developed all those other legs over the years, and it was just time to take a look at the experience.
And so in a way, one of the things as well is maybe highlighting quality experience over quantity, mentioning things like the supervisory appraisers, that you have to have certain qualifications to become a supervisor. But also what was originally proposed in some of what the AQB had put out, and we'll talk about this more in detail in a little bit, but the practical applications of real estate appraisal concept, which that is in many ways being viewed as what might be some superior training opportunities, if once developed, that would allow someone to get a very solid level of training. Therefore, the number of hours may not be as important, thereby reducing them. We're going to talk more about PAREA in a minute, but that is one of the things that sometimes gets a little bit lost in this, because the AQB decided to make sure that this PAREA concept is done right, that they took it out of the last exposure draft so that it could be done right, for lack of a better term. But when you consider all the changes together, originally the AQB was thinking PAREA would be part of this, so the experience hours coming down made a lot more sense. So that's one of the reasons there's a little disconnect there. As we mentioned earlier, the AQB has developed some guidance on the new requirements in the form of a guide note, a new guide note, and some implementation Q&As. The AQB is aware, because the states don't necessarily have to adopt the lower experience requirements and such, that there may be a concern with reciprocity in some states. Does the AQB believe that this May 2018 criteria is equal or equivalent to the pre-May 2018 criteria?
Yes, absolutely. Again, we feel like a credentialed appraiser under the 2015 criteria is equal to the credentialed appraiser under the May 1st, 2018 criteria. So we strongly encourage the jurisdictions to maintain reciprocity. And from what we understand, most states are maintaining an open door policy, which is what we encourage.
That's great news. That's great news. Again, we've gotten a couple of questions in, but in case you joined late or did not hear previously, if you have questions, please use that chat feature on the Zoom application that you're viewing this live stream with, and we will be happy to try to answer it here in just a few minutes. Mark, what else is the board doing to help states with implementation?
First off is if you go to the website, the Appraisal Foundation website, you can download this book. This is the 2018 criteria. That's May 1st. In the criteria, we have Guide Note 10, and Guide Note 10 is a new guide note that is designed to help the jurisdictions implement that 30 semester hour alternative to the college degree, and it gives very detailed application on how that may go down. So we're trying to do that. We've put out a Q&A booklet that is also downloadable from the Appraisal Foundation website. So we are always available for speaking engagements. So you can go on the Appraisal Foundation website, you can fill out a speaker request form, and we will do our best to honor that and try to make ourselves available and explain exactly what the intent of the AQB is and the new criteria.
That's great. That's great assistance. And one more thing that we've actually had for quite a while, and some states and applicants weren't necessarily aware of it, but we've updated it, a new student tracking sheet for those applicants that may be looking for a credential, to just kind of give them an easy way to check off what requirements they have already met. So we've talked about the changes in the college level education for licensed residential and certified residential. We've talked about the new options for somebody who wants to be a certified residential credential holder that may not have a bachelor's degree. We've talked about the reducing the number of hours of experience and the time frames. What's next? What does the board intend to look at next, Mark?
Well, as has been alluded to previously, we've got this concept that we are exploring that we've entitled Practical Applications of Real Estate Appraisal. And we've given it this silly acronym that everybody talks about called PREA. We are studying this topic. We've got work groups that are going to be meeting here in the next few weeks to try to put some detail to outlines of what this could be. But we really feel like that this concept of PREA, Practical Applications of Real Estate Appraisal, could provide a revolutionary way of gaining experience in the marketplace. Have we got all the answers? No, we're not there yet. But we have gotten tremendous feedback from both appraisers and users of appraisals that this concept could be it could be a game changer. We hear constantly from appraisers wanting to enter the profession that have an issue with, I can't find a supervisor. We hear from supervisors that it's not economically feasible to bring on a trainee. And so, but that's the model that we have now. It's the only model we have is a supervisor trainee, that mentor-mentee model. And it's the only one we have. So we are looking at providing an alternative to that. And the alternative could be this Practical Applications of Real Estate Appraisal. We're studying it very hard, and hopefully in the next several months, We may even have a little product that we can demonstrate what we're talking about.
So yeah, there's a lot of people that have asked, you know, what exactly is this? Does this POREA look like? And as you said, we don't have all the answers yet, but there's a few things that we believe. One is, and this is a clarification. It's not just a belief. POREA is not education.
Correct.
This is experience. Now, you know, someone can say, well, isn't it educational? Well, sure, everything you do can be educational. But this is to address the experience component of the criteria. In addition, the end product, you know, people say, oh, well, you're just going to go through this and do this, you know, possibly virtual simulations and things, but that's going to be their training. No, the students, the individuals that participate in POREA are going to have to complete USPAP compliant appraisal reports to successfully complete a POREA module. So it's real appraising. It may incorporate simulated properties. We're working on that. The technology that exists today with virtual reality and other tools, you know, there are a lot of people that believe that may provide superior training opportunities for a trainee. So for example, even if you have a very outstanding supervising appraiser as your mentor, if you're in a certain marketplace that supervisor, where their practice is located, you're pretty much relegated to the market conditions in that market.
Correct.
So if you're training somebody and values are increasing and there's low supply of housing, it's hard to train somebody on declining markets and an oversupply of housing. But with a simulation incorporating the highest tech today, you can push a button and the market conditions can be completely different.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we are hoping will come out of this POREA model. Number one is we get more consistency in training. Right now, the consistency of supervision over our trainees is not consistent across the profession. We have some that are very, very good trainers, and they do a really good job of training the new professionals coming into the appraisal world. But then there's others that we hear, we see enforcement of new appraisers, and they say, well, this was the way I was taught, and it was taught wrong. So we're hopefully the outcome out of POREA would be a more consistent training model. It's also important to understand that this is experience. So it's not a case studies. We are talking about producing USPAP compliant appraisals across the however long of time span it is. But it's also important to know that, you know, we haven't decided on how many block of hours that we're talking about would be granted through a POREA program. However, there's no talk right now of it applying to all of your experience. You're still going to have some practical supervisor relationship for 25, 30%, whatever we decide in the end would be for your remaining portion of your experience. But this hopefully will grant a large block of hours and make that training appraiser become more marketable to a supervisor.
So let's talk just a little bit more about that for a second, because there are people who have said, how is POREA going to be any different than what was currently allowed in the criteria, the practicum courses, where you can get up to 50% of your experience, and everyone points out, why are there no practicum courses that have been developed since 2008 when this became an option? And we have heard it's largely economical, the cost to develop such a program. And here's the key, what do you get out of that program?
That's correct.
Because under the current criteria, the only way to award hours would be for the actual appraisals performed in a practicum course. The problem with that is if you develop this course, it's going to cost thousands of dollars, and somebody might walk away with at the end having done, let's say, 10 appraisals, and maybe they end up with just 100 hours of experience. And as Mark said, with PREA, the big distinction here is going to be that if developed, done properly, someone may walk out of there with, say, 75% of the experience that's necessary. And Mark, you talked about them being more marketable. Somebody who is a trainee today and trying to find a supervisor will cold call people and say, hey, how about hire me? And a lot of times the answer is no.
Correct.
But you envision something different maybe with somebody who's had 75% of their experience?
Yes, if a training appraiser can call an active licensed or certified appraiser and say, listen, I've been through the PREA model. I've got 60, 80%, whatever the number is, of my experience hours done. Will you provide the other 25, 30%, whatever it needs of training? That is a more economical thought process than coming in and saying, will you spend 18 months, 24 months, whatever the time it takes to gain experience? From a supervisor standpoint, that's a much more intense obligation on the supervisor's part of training. But if the trainee can come in and say, I've already got my block of hours, I'm just needing the other part, that makes that training more marketable.
So it really, you're talking about in today's world with a trainee trying to find a supervisor, it really becomes a burden on the supervisor. Whereas if this PREA is developed the way that the board is thinking, that person immediately can be an asset, even though they may not have their full amount of experience done. So
that's correct.
We think those are some important differences there. We've received a few questions. Again, we'll try to start addressing those. Again, I'll just mention, if you do have a question, type it in the chat box there on the Zoom application, and we will attempt to answer them. The first question that we've received, Mark, you talked about this early on. The question is, can you please expand on the idea that a licensed appraiser is not necessarily competent? So in other words, the qualifications aren't intended to determine that somebody is competent, just qualified. Can you talk a little more about that?
That's correct. We hear this question a good bit about the difference between qualifications and competency. You have to understand that as you move through the criteria and you become ready to take your licensed residential exam or your certified residential exam or even your CG exam, you've progressed all the way through there. Well, you have the qualifications to be an appraiser, but again, competency is acquired over time. We do assume that there is a certain level of competency there that's gained through education and the experience part that is in the criteria. But you're certainly not going to be competent to do every property. You're not going to be competent to do the complex property. That's going to be acquired over time. So this is a continual process. If you look back I've been appraising for upwards of 34 years. If I went back to year 2 of my time as a real estate appraiser, and I look at my product that I produced as an appraisal back then compared to the product that I produce now, hopefully I show some competence that's gained over the years. And so this is what we're talking about. Again, AQB is charged with qualifications. Competence is gained over time.
And to that end, our standards, USPAP, there is a competency rule in USPAP for exactly that reason, that appraisers, that competency is something that varies from assignment to assignment, the required competency that's necessary. And just as you said, even a certified general appraiser that is legally allowed to appraise any real property types, they're not necessarily competent in every assignment. So competency is definitely, that's a big distinction there. Our next question is that does college level education expire after 5 years? And we need to clarify that college level education does not have an expiration date or a shelf life on it.
No, it does not.
So when it comes to education, the only thing that has a shelf life applies to the qualifying education, not college education, for a trainee. Only the trainee classification. The criteria specifies that for the trainee, the qualifying ed, and that's 75 hours in the real property criteria, has to be within the 5 years immediately preceding the application. That's the only shelf life or restriction there is on education anywhere in the criteria.
That is correct.
Great. We have another question. The question is, one of our appraisal organizations, the Appraisal Institute, offers something called the capstone courses. And that involves a case study and a detailed analysis of a property. The question is, how does PAREA differ from capstone courses?
This is a terrific question. The capstone course from the Appraisal Institute is a terrific course. But I understand the course. They hand you a packet of material, area description data, comparable sales. You have to filter through the data, pick out what is applicable, throw out what's not, analyze the data, and then put together an appraisal at the end. But that's one appraisal. And all the data is fed to the appraiser. PAREA is talking about producing multiple appraisals, USPAP compliant appraisals. And also, we're taking a step back from the point of we're just handing you the data that's already, somebody's already researched the data. The question becomes, how do you get that data? And that's part of training. And so it's actually taking a more granular look at the process of training as opposed to a capstone course, which is at the very end of an education cycle, an experience cycle that is even beyond qualifying education. So it is a different thought process. It does have some similarities, but it's more basic level of training. What would you do on day one with that training?
Yeah, important distinction. The word that the AQB has been talking about with PAREA is designed. It's going to be designed to emulate real appraisal practice, as Mark said, from square one on these various assignments that the board is looking at. The other thing I wanted to mention about PAREA real quick is that at this time, there is no intention to look at it for commercial properties. We're talking about strictly residential, right?
That's correct. We want to start with the residential, primarily because that's the focus of the troubles now with the supervisor trainee model. It's primarily in the residential field. Can it expand to the certified general arena? Sure, but we want to start with residential, get that correct, and get that product on the street. Or at least have some kind of outline, something that providers could do, but get that going, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So one step at a time.
Walk before we run.
Walk before we run.
Another question about PAREA. As you can sense, PAREA has garnished a lot of attention and a lot of interest from a lot of people. And as we kind of alluded to, we think if this thing is done right, this can be a real game changer as far as the ability of people to enter the profession. The next question is, are there industry participants that have expressed a willingness to provide PAREA? And I guess all I can say is absolutely.
We've had a lot of interest from a lot of different providers in the concept of PREA. The AQB at this point in time is focused on finding what is the goal of a PREA module. What are we trying to accomplish? And we're going to try to do that through outlines, through detailed outlines of exactly what we're intending to be the end goal. And from there, we'll pile on and we will begin to develop of where this thing may go. We're not exactly for sure right now because nobody's done this. So we're on the cutting edge here.
Well, I think a lot of people are excited, and yes, we've garnered a lot of interest, but we're certainly welcome to others who have ideas and concepts we should look at. The next question, if someone's license has lapsed, how do they proceed with obtaining a current license under the new requirements? Guide Note 5 offers some guidance, but not a complete answer.
The first thing I would make sure that I would tell anybody that is your license is lapsed or whatever, check with your state, with your jurisdiction. They're going to have very specific answers on how to solve that issue.
Yeah, and just to tag on a little bit to that, you know, when someone says their license has lapsed, that can mean different things in different states, as Mark's talking about. Many states have a grace period after which a license has lapsed, that you can come back in and simply do some administrative things and be able to have that license reinstated. There's also the possibility that you might have to come in and start from scratch if your license has lapsed and it's past a grace period and you're not able to reinstate it. If that's the case, most states will require you to meet the requirements that are in effect at the time of your new application. It doesn't mean that any of your old qualifications go away, but if you are in that case, you will have to meet the criteria that's in effect today.
That's great.
There's a question that says, I think Mark talked about that most states are anticipating offering reciprocity with the new criteria. What states are not anticipated, and what is the recourse? Do we have?
We don't have any information on that. We are, of course, the appraisal subcommittee is in our meetings, and we try to stay as informed as possible. But the actual implementation of the criteria, while we're giving all the information we can, we are stressing that we are encouraging reciprocity, that we do consider a credentialed appraiser under the 2015 criteria equal to a credentialed appraiser under 2018. We're giving all that information. It's still up to the states of what they adopt.
Yeah, and that's and you know, in a worst case scenario, and certainly we hope it's not this, we haven't heard of any states that have said, to what Mark's point, that we are not going to offer reciprocity. But in an absolute worst case, or in a state that isn't reciprocal, you know, someone can look at satisfying the qualifications in that state and qualifying that way, as opposed to reciprocity. But as Mark said, and we're all hopeful that being able to obtain a credential through reciprocity would remain a very viable and easier option. The next question or comment says, the Appraiser Foundation is working towards a day where there will be a way for an appraiser to obtain a certification without the need for a local supervisor appraiser. A shift to no local supervisor appraisal is too radical, but the stated 60 to 80% of virtual training will pave the way to 100% virtual training. And the question is, do you agree or disagree?
I don't think it's any secret that we have explored the idea of, can you get all of your experience through a virtual type setting such as PREA? That concept was done away with pretty quickly. Will it pave the way in the future? Well, I would say, first off, let's look at what we come out with, and let's see how it is done. Let's see how practical it is. Will it eventually get to 100%? We don't know. It's going to take a long time to mature. Folks don't learn the same way that I learned back 34 years ago. Their learning styles are different. The market it's different. Things are changing. What will it look like 20 years from now? I don't know. I can assure you it probably won't look the same as it does today.
And one of the important things we want to mention here too is PREA is not looking to be a replacement for today's trainee and supervisor model. It's another option, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
So because there are obviously some good supervising appraisers out there. There are some supervising appraisers we'd love to have people train under. So this would not preclude that from continuing.
That's correct.
This would just provide another option for, as Mark talked about earlier, those appraisers who can't get a supervisor to help train them.
That's correct.
The next comment question says, supervisor or appraisers need more support. Would a course in how to be a good supervisor be useful? For example, an 8-hour course that goes over basic management skills, finance, compensation, things like that. We do have a requirement. There's a 4-hour supervisor trainee course in the criteria that anyone wishing to become a supervisor or any new trainees must take. As far as the general business skills, I guess, Mark, you want to comment on that? And maybe not just as a supervisor, but as an appraiser.
Sure. I mean, those are all very useful things, and we would never discourage more education. Supervisors, do they need more support? Well, this is exactly the issue that we're dealing with. Is you just don't have consistency across the supervisor realm. And so the concept is this PREA could actually provide very good, very consistent quality training where we get at least the base of experience consistent across the training appraisers. So absolutely, we could have better education for our supervisors, and our providers would be great sources of that.
Great, thanks. The next question that we've got is, do I need a supervisor to be